Peterson, and I'm here at the Alaska State Library with my colleague Daniel Cornwall, and with our next installment in the Government Info Without Tears series. And today, our speaker is Kate Burkhart, who is the State Ombudsman. She started June 2017, and in her presentation called Ombudswho, she'll be talking about the Office of the Ombudsman, what they do, and how they can work with libraries to benefit our users and all Alaskans. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Kate and hear what she has to say about the Ombudsman's office.
Although this is Daniel with one technical comment. Valerie, if you could be muted while you're not actually asking questions, it would help with the feedback.
Thank you, Freya. It is great to have the chance to experience the OWL network firsthand after hearing for years about this resource for our community statewide. And I want to thank our staff member, Kate Remy, who came to us from the library system for coming up with the idea of connecting with Alaska's libraries through the OWL network and exploring ways to partner with library staff to better help Alaskans who experience problems with state government. So Daniel, I think, is going to run our presentation.
If you could press the PC button on there. Or share.
I
and
did.
Then...
Yeah, it just didn't.
There we go.
Okay. And there should be a button to kill the self-view.
Okay.
So if we can move to the first slide. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the role of the Ombudsman, and I'll introduce myself since I am new. I've been in office about 5 months now. What our office does and how we investigate complaints related to state government and where those connections are with libraries as a hub for information and resources in communities. And then we'll talk about our strategic plan, because one of our goals is related to outreach and expanding the ways that people can access our services. Next, please. So as Freya said, I was appointed earlier this year and took office in June. I've been in Alaska since 2001. I came to Nome first and started working for Alaska Legal Services. I worked for Alaska Legal Services for several years as a public interest lawyer. I did have the opportunity to work briefly for the State Ombudsman before serving the Alaska Mental Health Board and the Advisory Board on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse and the Statewide Suicide Prevention Council for a decade. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors for the local Independent Living Center here in Juneau. And so I have a background in serving Alaskans from a variety of experiences and regions and disabilities, and one of my commitments as the Ombudsman is to ensure that we're as accessible as possible to all Alaskans. Next, please. So the mission of the Office of the Ombudsman is set in statute, and that's to investigate citizen complaints about administrative acts of state agencies. So in the world of libraries, that would include the state library. It would not include local libraries. Our vision, which is set internally, is that we achieve that mission by promoting fair and efficient government by objective inquiry and well-reasoned recommendations for improvement. So we are hoping that by connecting with local libraries, we will be able to better connect with folks to achieve that vision and that mission. Next, please. So what do we actually do? The Ombudsman is an organization that investigates complaints about state government agencies. Those complaints, by and large, come from citizens who are hitting roadblocks in their dealings with state agencies. If there is a reason for the ombudsman herself to start an investigation, I can, but citizens drive the work. And citizen includes individuals, it can include organizations, but it's the public. We are not a citizen advocate. So our job is not, when Daniel comes to the ombudsman and says, I have a complaint, our job is not to solve it the way he wants. Our job is to look at his complaint objectively, determine whether there's a problem, and then if there is, recommend a way to resolve it. And that may or may not be the way Daniel wants. I will tell you that over half of the complaints we investigate do not result in a finding that the agency made a mistake. Often it's an issue of misunderstanding or miscommunication, or people wanting things that just are not possible. And one of the policies while I'm ombudsman is that when we do complete an investigation and it finds that a state agency did not make a mistake, we will discuss that, publicize that as much as we do when an agency does make a mistake. Mm-hmm. Because you're not objective if you only talk about when people mess up. So next, please. So why would the ombudsman want to connect with libraries? And so I would hazard a guess that the library in Seward, along with libraries around the state, have the same experience as libraries in larger communities like Juneau and Anchorage have, which is that they have become a hub, whether intentionally or not, for folks who are in need of social services and supports. Whether it's because they are homeless and it's cold and wet and they need to be someplace dry, or it's because they experience a disability and are not able to access their support networks without assistance, people come to libraries. And so because we know that people come to libraries looking for information and looking for ways to resolve their problems, it makes sense that we would be part of that group of community organizations linked to libraries to help those folks. It's also great for library staff. So when Daniel comes in and says, I have a complaint, you can say, well, who you really want to talk to is the ombudsman. And we plan to provide resources to libraries so that you can make those referrals as seamlessly as possible. Whether it's folks who are homeless or who experience a disability or senior citizens or young people, often they struggle to navigate the programs the state offers, whether it's housing or income assistance or victims' compensation for victims of crime. And that's where the ombudsman can help them resolve their problems and complaints. So that's why we're here today. Next, please. So I'd like to talk, oh, that was really loud, I apologize. I'd like to talk about how we do our work. So I've talked about that we're an objective organization and not an advocacy organization. And so we use a standard of review that is preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not. And we look at citizen complaints about government agencies based on standards, and they're listed here on the screen. I won't read them all. Most of the time, the standards we are looking at are contrary to law, unreasonable, and unfair. So folks come to us and say, I applied for my Medicaid benefits 3 months ago, and I haven't gotten a response. So that would be unreasonable because that's a long time, right? So that would be the standard that we would use. We have these other standards that are typically invoked less frequently. Like you'll see arbitrary and capricious there. Like I say, most of the time agencies are not acting willfully against all of their policies. So it's rare that we see that standard. But we use these standards and we use this evidentiary standard to ensure that our review is objective and it's consistent across all complaints. Next, please. So what does the process look like? So I wish it was quite that linear. It's not always that linear. But we do have an intake process. So when people contact us, we have a way to screen complaints. If they are not jurisdictional, we tend to refer them to appropriate resources. We decide whether to investigate, and then if we do investigate, there's an investigatory process, and then we try to find a way to resolve the problem. Next, please. So we have centralized intake in Anchorage, which means all new complaints, unless they walk into the Juneau office, are processed through Anchorage. In 2016, we received over 2,500 calls, emails, letters, contacts requesting assistance. The intake team triages those for folks who call and say, my neighbor's chickens are too loud and you need to fix it, which is a real call. Those get referred to a local resource, like the local animal control or something appropriate. For complaints that are jurisdictional, our team does the initial information gathering and then moves it on. If a person has not tried to resolve their problem with the agency, we do encourage them to do that. And complainants from the prison system are required to use the institutional grievance process before we will investigate a complaint. Because we want agencies to have the chance to fix things, and we also want to empower Alaskans to solve their own problems. If the complaint is jurisdictional and appropriate for review, then it is moved forward and we review all new complaints once a week as a team. The next slide provides an overview of our contacts in 2016, and you'll see that about half of them are non-jurisdictional. And so whether it's about a non-governmental organization like a nonprofit or an elected official or a municipality. So if we got a complaint about the Seward Library, that would be non-jurisdictional. And we would refer that to like the Seward City Council or to the director of the library. Next, please. So as I said, we review all new complaints within a week of their receipt, which is part of our efforts to increase the efficiency of our investigations. Our intake staff actually handle the bulk of our information and referral and short service, and our investigators focus on the more complex and in-depth investigations. Next, please. So I can't reiterate enough that the Ombudsman is objective and that our investigators look at complaints without bias or preconception. And when I say that, I mean that we work very hard to recognize the issues of institutional bias, implicit bias, confirmation bias, all those things that are lurking in the background, and test our assumptions so that we're not bringing a bunch of ambient bias or preconceptions to our investigations. And we work as a team to do that. Investigations include review of documents. For those of you who come from an archive background, you're very familiar with getting, a big pile of information and digesting it and processing it. We also interview complainants and agency personnel and any witnesses or people with information that's relevant. case files and court files, and non-documentary evidence, photos, maps, videos, those kinds of things. We have the ability to look at all state material, not just public records, all state material. The Ombudsman is given wide authority to look at state agencies' information, but the Ombudsman is also held to one of the highest confidentiality standards possible, which means that when we look at an agency's information, that does not get moved forward to anyone. It's not shared with the complainant. It's not shared with legislators. It is used exclusively for the purposes of an investigation. Some investigations can be completed in a matter of days and resolved with 2 phone calls and an email, and some investigations can take months. Our goal is that all investigations are closed within a year, because the Ombudsman has struggled to close investigations in a timely fashion. So we're working on that. Next, please. So when an investigation is done, we either find the complaint allegations justified, which means yes, the agency made a mistake, or partially justified, which means yes, it didn't go really well, but it's not as bad as we thought. Or unsupported, which means no, the agency did what it was supposed to do. If we find it justified or partially justified, we make recommendations to resolve it. So one of our new practices is that at that point in an investigation, there's a conversation with the agency. So this is a problem. How would you suggest we solve it? Rather than the Ombudsman, in its own judgment, putting forward a recommendation which may or may not be aligned with best practices or the evidence related to that program. That doesn't necessarily mean the Ombudsman will accept the agency's suggestion, but it's more of a dialogue than a directive. My background is, despite being a lawyer, my background is actually more collaborative, and especially when it comes to public policy. If everybody's kind of on the same page, it seems to work better than if one person is directing everyone else. The remedy sought by the complainant is not always the recommendation. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And again, we're not an advocate, so we will take into consideration what the complainant is asking for, and that is part of the process, but it's not determinative. Next, please. So I've talked a little bit about how a complaint, what the outcomes can be. We work really hard to ensure that the recommendations that are offered make sense, are practical, and that there's a likelihood they'll be recommended. Why would you make a recommendation that no one is going to implement? And then a redacted executive summary of the final report on the investigation is published. So again, complaints are confidential, so we don't talk about our complaints in relation to specific complainants, but it is important for Alaskans to see the work we do, and especially when there are problems, to be aware of those. So because we have Seward Online, an example of how we talk about our work, this fall, we issued a report related to an investigation of Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. We provided a public report that was redacted. It didn't name the people involved, but talked about the problems that we documented and how DOC was planning to rectify those or had already rectified those. So that's how we talk about our work in public. Next, please. So you're not, I don't know if you can actually see that if you are looking at the screen during the presentation, but we've got a chart here that shows our complaints by agencies. And it's probably not a surprise that the vast majority of our complaints come from the correctional system. So it's about a third of our complaints. And so we have a specific process for complaints from the correctional system to help kind of manage that caseload. Then departments after that comprise a big chunk of our work are the Department of Health and Social Services, particularly the Office of Children's Services and Public Assistance. And so if you think about it, where people are more likely to complain and seek help are with those basic needs programs like food stamps, Medicaid, access to your children, your personal liberties. People are less likely to complain about the things that may not impact those core parts of our families and our lives. But about half of our work comes from the rest of the state system. And so you can see that we get complaints about the Child Support Services Division, although not as many as we used to because they have a really effective grievance process over there. Public advocacy, the Public Defender's Office, always a big chunk are about the permanent fund dividend. And so you can kind of see that. But you can also see that that's one of the reasons we are doing more outreach is that I'm pretty confident that there are Alaskans who have complaints about state agencies that are not represented in our current complaint load. And it may be that they just don't know that the Ombudsman is a resource. And so this is a way to help promote our services for folks who need them. Next, please. So for my term of office, which is 5 years, we've adopted a strategic plan that the staff put together collaboratively. And it's based around these core values of objectivity, curiosity, which seems like a weird value, but for us, we have to be curious. We can't be judgmental. We have to be curious. And also, we get to learn about all kinds of neat new things that the state does. So if we were to get a complaint about the archives, I'm not sure we've ever had a complaint about the archives. And so we'd have to learn all about it. Yeah. And so if we can bring that value of curiosity to it, then we're more likely to do a good job. Respect, which is the idea of treating everyone with respect and consideration. It's probably not shocking that many of the people who come to our offices are angry and upset, and a lot of them are either in crisis or experience a behavioral health need. And so we work really, really hard to equip our staff with the tools and training they need to work with those folks. And I would hazard a guess that library staff have the same experiences. And so there's an opportunity, hopefully over time, for us to share our expertise because that's really hard sometimes. We have committed to a level of professional integrity and ethics in our work because we believe that it's important. And of course, we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't have a commitment to public service. Next, please. So we have 8 goals to accomplish in the next 5 years. And this presentation is a big chunk of goal 1. So we have been trying to connect with diverse stakeholders to talk about who we are. That's why the presentation is Ombudswho, also the owl thing. So who we are, what we do, why it's important and valuable, and how we can be of assistance. And then also we want to offer our expertise in these areas, like how to deal with complaints to state agencies and to community organizations that are seeking to better deal with those. Next, please. And so one of the things to consider for both local libraries and the state library system is because we've got these specific goals of expanding outreach and then sharing what we know and hopefully learning from what you know. Where are those opportunities to partner? And so are there ways to make use of OWL more often? Are there ways to help support libraries who might be struggling to respond to patrons' complaints, whether it's about the library or about anybody else? And so in addition to the live presentation and the recorded presentation, we are, if folks are interested, able to send information and complaint forms to all of the libraries statewide, to where when you're in a situation where someone, you feel like it's appropriate to refer them to us, you can make a seamless referral. You can say, here's the brochure, here's the complaint form. You can get on the computer and do it all online. There you go. And so because we know that Alaskans, especially in rural Alaska, often go to the library for information or just to use the computer. And so having our resources there is good for library staff, it's good for patrons, it's good for us. So with that, are there any questions or comments? Do you think that there are ways that we could partner better?
I had a couple of sort of, I guess, kind of general questions that came up in fascinating presentation. But when the issue that somebody is, when the thing that somebody is not happy with is something that is official law or policy, and it's just that they don't like what the law or policy says to do. First of all, sort of how often do you get that kind of a question? And second of all, how do you deal with that?
So, over half of our complaints, that's the end result, is that's the law, that's the policy, the agency's doing what it's supposed to do. Some of our complainants are able to hear that and we help explain. So for example, we periodically get complaints about the food in the prison system, particularly folks seeking special religious diets. And so they want what they feel like is the diet that they need. Well, there are policies. And so helping them understand what the policy is, helping them understand that what they are requesting is beyond what is reasonable to ask of the Department of Corrections, and that there are alternatives available that would meet their dietary needs. Some people are like, oh, all right, well, it's not really what I wanted, but I can eat the vegetarian meal and I'll be fine. Some people are having none of it. And that's just part of it. I mean, being an ombudsman or working for the ombudsman, you have to get comfortable delivering news people don't want to hear. We work really hard to explain things in a way that people can understand. So hopefully, even if they don't like it, they understand why it is the way it is. A lot of our complaints around the Office of Children's Services are in the same boat, where I understand that you're really unhappy. A judge made this decision. And the ombudsman has no authority to change a judge's decision. But here are the things you can do, and you can talk to your lawyer about to try to change it. We do try not to just say no or you're wrong. We try to say no, but, or, well, that's not really how it is. This is how it is. And here are some ways that you can make that work for you. I will tell you that we are not always successful. Again, because there are some complainants, a pretty large number, who either because of their circumstances or the way they see the world, that they're not going to accept that. And that's okay. But I have had complainants who I thought were never going to understand and be happy. It turned out, we're like, oh, I get that. All right.
Right.
And they kind of move on.
It is amazing how much understanding something can really understanding something can make a difference.
I think so. And our staff work really hard to communicate with people in a way that maybe others don't.
Mm-hmm.
People who come in with really challenging behaviors, it's often our reaction to be like,
Mm-hmm.
no,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and we want to assert boundaries and rules, and those are very important. Boundaries and rules are very important.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's always the response you get,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to feel like no one's listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so our office really tries hard to be the office that always answers the phone
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mhm.
listens.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that's really what people want. It's just
Yeah.
that somebody will listen and commiserate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
Oh, before
Go
that,
ahead.
I thought I saw Valerie go for her microphone
Did you?
earlier. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. It was kind of on the same lines because I was looking at the records online and I noticed that it said that where did I see that? Oh, that the ombudsman. Sorry, I have a hard time saying that. Cannot enforce the recommendations. So you put forth a recommendation and when it's not followed, that's the agency's. I don't know. It's up to them to whether they follow that or not. How does that
it
work?
is. So that's part of the reason that I'm hopeful that this more collaborative way of making recommendations.
Actually, let me interrupt for a moment, and if you could mute again, Valerie.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Will help resolve that. So if I tell Daniel, you'll do what I tell you because I told you so, he's going to tell me to jump in the lake. And I'm not going to be able to do anything about that. But if I say, hey, Daniel, this is not really working. How can we try to make this better? And he says, well, what we really need is training on how to deal with angry, yelly people at the front desk. And I'll say, all right, let's recommend that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he's going to do what I recommended because it was his idea to begin with, right? And so for the ombudsman, it's incumbent on us to make recommendations that agencies can and have some desire to do. That doesn't mean that sometimes we're not going to say, you need to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But the more collaborative, the better. But then one of the reasons we publish our work is that the legislature and the governor's office and the people of Alaska have the power to make change. So even if Daniel says, Kate, jump in the lake, there are other people who can say, oh no, you're going to make this change. And so to be effective, an ombudsman has to have earned authority because we don't have positional authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a part of outreach and helping Alaskans see why we're valuable, helping state agencies see how we're valuable, and really recommitting to our objectivity and promoting when agencies do work well, so that we build our earned authority so that recommendations are more likely to be followed.
I like in the example you gave, then Daniel has a good justification to say we need funding for this training, or we need time off for this training or whatever. So that's sort of, I like how it is helping to get better rather than punitive.
Right.
Did you have another question, Valerie, or did that?
That's all I have right now. Yeah, thank you.
I had one other thing that I noticed when you were doing your presentation, and this is probably a little bit more as being a state agency rather than being a library, but one of the things that I noticed you mentioned was that complaints had gone down when there was a good, effective grievance process in place. And I was wondering, do you guys provide any training on how to set up a good grievance process, or how?
That's goal 8. So there are several things that we have the expertise to provide technical assistance on. One of those is, what's a good grievance process. We are, in fact, revising our own grievance process to bring it into a more evidence-based, practical way of doing business. Another is, we call them unreasonable complainants, those folks that are really challenging. And so if a state agency did want to either develop a grievance process or revise their grievance process, then we would be happy to provide technical assistance. And then another area is the universities are developing student ombudsmen, and we've offered technical assistance to them as they develop their protocols and processes.
What about state or local, not state, what about local governments? Is that somewhere where you, even if you don't have jurisdiction, where you would provide technical assistance?
I would be happy to do that. So there's nothing, while we have the ability to have jurisdiction over municipalities if they want us to.
Okay.
They can contract with us. But there's nothing that prevents us from saying, if invited, that we would provide technical assistance. So if a local library felt like, oh, maybe we need a way to really handle when people are upset with us, they could contact us and we could provide technical assistance.
Cool. Do we have anything else? Anything anybody would like to add?
I don't have anything. I've got several takeaways that I'll take back to library development on the whole, assistance to localities.
Great. So we have a kind of a follow-up plan. So we have these brochures that really quick tell about the Ombudsman and how to contact us. And so Kate Remy in my office is going to do kind of a follow-up letter with a link once we have it to the recorded presentation, and we'll provide probably a couple of hard copies and then electronic copies of our brochure and complaint forms so that they can be on hand at libraries. And then anybody that didn't make it today is encouraged, of course, to go click the link and spend, 40 minutes with the Ombudsman.
Right. Wonderful. Well,
Yeah, the only other comment that I had was that looking at the form, it's a pretty simple form. It's 2 pages. That's not overwhelming. You're asking for really reasonable details, but it's not an overwhelming form. So what I was wondering was, in dealing with so many referrals that, complaints that you have to refer out, what is your plan to try to reduce that? Is this part of, I'm assuming this is part of it, but what is kind of the, what's your plan?
So I actually don't want to discourage people from contacting the Ombudsman for information and referral. So if you have a problem and you haven't been able to figure it out on your own and nobody has any answers for you, and you end up calling us, if you find us and call us, if we're not the right people, that's fine. And we can refer you out. We also try not to do cold referrals. So, for example, if somebody is looking for help related to Social Security, which there are very limited resources to help someone with a Social Security appeal. I'm not just going to refer them to the Disability Law Center because they may or may not be taking those cases. So we'll call ahead and make sure it's a good referral and say we are sending someone to you so that the referral is more meaningful, because no one really ever calls the Ombudsman that's not the first call. That's usually like the 7th or 8th call. And so we want their 9th call to be the last call. And so, yeah, I don't really have a plan to discourage non-jurisdictional calls. I want to get people to the right resources, whether it's us or someone else.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That's good to know, because when I looked at that, I was thinking, well, maybe you're trying to reduce the number of those, but thanks for explaining that.
Sure.
okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks so much for coming.